How is? I saw a photograph there in an article on Facebook of a circular embankment with a stone circle in the middle in Derbyshire in England. Almost identical to most of what we call Raths in Ireland, Roths, which is the Irish word for a rat. A rath is an enclosed ring made of an embankment and a ditch. Triple, some of them are doubles, some of them are triples. There's 40, most of them are single. There's one just over there, quite an impressive one. Most of them are, there's about 40,000 of them in Ireland. Most are early Bronze Age, some are late Neolithic. Now, the standard archaeological description for this is they have a defensive or an enclosure protective purpose. That they were used primarily for people to run into when they were being attacked, and to bring their cattle in so the cattle couldn't be stolen at night. Now, it makes no sense on lots of levels. Firstly is some of these things, as you can see by the thumbnail pic for this, as that's one in County Roscommon in Ireland, have enormous infrastructure built into them. They're also generally filled with cosmological and solar alignments. Many have stones in the middles, like the Giant's Ring in Belfast. They, why would, as a dolmen in the middle, why would they have stone circles or dolmens in the middles of them? A lot of them, the stones have fallen over. Like this, Nathan, the truth again. Like the one in Derbyshire there I saw. The one appears large stones in the middle. And you go to the Irish Archaeological Database and they don't tell you what the reason for that is. They just don't tell you. Now, at the worst, they'll say, oh, there were foundations for circular mud huts or wooden huts or the grass huts or straw huts or whatever. Now, as I said, the infrastructure on many of these things is colossal. Colossal. And why go to all that trouble to protect a few cattle? And in a defensive situation, if you take it the one of the stone ones, like at Grinon Aylock on top of the mountain in Donegal, a child could hurl a stone over that easy enough and kill. If you have enough people on the outside, all they have to do is fire arrows, stones, and spears in, and everyone inside is killed in no time. They would be giant coffins. That's really what they were if they were for defensive purposes. Also, in terms of infrastructure, the commitment to their construction in terms of either as corrals, pens for cattle, or as defensive structures makes no sense, and I'll tell you why. It's too much labour intensive. At the time they were built, Ireland was covered in dense forest, and it was the easiest thing in the world to cut down good quality trees and build, say, a fence out of ash. Ash is an incredibly strong wood. It's flexible. You build a fence or a fort out of, like the old forts in the Wild West, like Fort Apache. If you build something like that as a defensive thing out of ash, it's almost impenetrable. Almost impenetrable. Unless you come to like the Romans with trebuchets and things like that and scorpions. But in terms of like an army at those times, impenetrable, and basically built in no time. Now, another easier one, and then you plant a row of hawthorn trees or blackthorn in front of them, and they reach maturity in no times. You cannot. This is why Ireland is covered in green patchwork fields. They're blackthorn hedgerows. They're impossible to get through. You cannot get through them. They've got little spikes inside them. This is why the British built the inland customs line across India from a thorn hedge to protect the whole, well, not to protect, but to stop the Indians from smuggling salt so they could use it as a bioweapon against them. Now, the the forts, another thing too is, why build a circle out in open ground? That makes no sense either, because firstly, if you were building them as a defensive structure, it'd make more sense to say build a semicircle or a partial circle next to a cliff top. And there are a few like Dunangus in the Aran Islands, but there's a very good theory that that was actually originally a circle and the cliff collapsed into the ocean, or up against the riverbank. And that way, you don't have to worry about building the infrastructure next to a fast-flowing river, because that will take care of any invading troops. You just kill them as they come up the riverbank or whatever. They wouldn't even be able to do it. It was a fast enough flowing river, and or a mud bank next to it. They wouldn't be able to traverse it. And then To that, then you wouldn't even have to bother building a complete circle. Secondly, um, the if you were allocating troops during an attack, you would have to distribute them among the whole entire length of the circle, the entire circumference. But if you built it next to a cliff face or a riverbank, you only have to allocate troops around the parts that are man-made, that are accessible, and therefore you have a much more effective defensive and distribution of manpower. Our ancients were just as intelligent as us. They did not build these things as circles out on open ground for defenses purposes. They did not build cosmological, geomantic, and uh, alignment, whenever you want to use earth energies, elements into them for that purpose. There would be no point in making them multi-ring circles and putting them in the middle of very ceremonial sites, I might add. And yet maybe later on some were converted to cattle pens by, by later tribes that came along, but in general they make no sense as in terms of tribal structures where you have different tribes attacking each other. In terms of defense, I believe that they had a very real ceremonial and spiritual function at the center of the community, and there was no mistake why they were a circle. There was something to that. Now, if you look at the one on the thumbnail for this picture when I put it up, it is a multi-ring circle on the ground. It's a gigantic version of the concentric circles you see cut into Neolithic stones, rock art all around the world. There's something about the concentric circle shape that the ancients had a particular resonance with. Resonance. And these were not defensive structures. They would have been open air coffins if you tried to defend an army or a community inside them. And there's the infrastructure's far too complex and labor intensive in terms of building it in order for them to be forts, as they're called. So they call them ringforts or fairy forts. See how they use the language fort, fort, fort. I was in one in Wales back in the spring, and it was identical to the ones you see in Ireland. And again, on open ground. And then the Romans had, now this was a good one because the Romans had moved in and taken the Bronze Age fort over it and turned it into a defensive structure. But the Romans wouldn't have wasted their time building that. The Romans would have built a wooden fort like they do everywhere, or embankments or barricades that would be only necessary for for in particular situations with the least manpower. It just was handy and they used it and made a fort of it. Now you had the long fort, which the Vikings built all over Europe, Britain and Scandinavia and France, and that was the built on the edge of a river, just like the one I said, so you don't have to defend behind yourself. You don't have to defend immediately in front, and you have a place to land boats. And this is what the ancient Irish would have done if they were building defensive structures. And the ancient Britons would have done the same. No, they built circles out on open ground. Why? Because there was a purpose to building a circle. That was the same reason they put concentric circles into rock art thousands of years before that. They knew something about vibration, earth energies, and the relationship between man, the natural environment, and the cosmos. And also, doesn't it look like ripples thrown in a pond? I often find that interesting, that a lot of these concentric circles look like as if somebody had dropped a pebble into a pond. Vibration, cymatics, the ancients knew.